Dust swirled around the wooden auction platform as Sarah clutched her infant to her bruised chest. The auctioneer's voice rang harsh against the weathered buildings of Copper Creek. "Sold to settle debts," he bellowed. Jeers erupted from the crowd of settlers and traders. Sarah closed her eyes, her fate sealed by her husband's gambling. Then an unexpected silence fell. Through the crowd stepped a tall Apache warrior, his face etched with dignity beyond his years. Without a word, he placed a leather pouch of silver in the auctioneer's hand. The crowd parted as he led mother and child away, not toward the saloons or homesteads, but toward the distant red canyons where his people dwelled. Could an act of mercy bridge two worlds torn apart by decades of bloodshed? Before we jump back, and tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Copper Creek hadn't always been the kind of place where women and children were sold at auction. 15 years earlier, it had been founded with hopeful dreams and a weathered town charter that promised equal prosperity for all who labor honestly. That yellow document now hung crooked in Mayor Thornton's office. The ink faded, much like the principles it once represented. The town had sprung up after a minor copper discovery in the nearby hills. Not enough to make anyone truly wealthy, but sufficient to draw hopeful souls westward. Among the first settlers were the Thorntons, the Wades, and Bartholomew Simmons, now the mayor, sheriff, and saloon owner, respectively. They'd built a community of wooden structures around a dusty main street, with hopes that the railroad might someday reach them. Those hopes dimmed with each passing year. The copper veins thinned. The railroad chose another route, 20 miles south, and the town found itself surviving rather than thriving. What remained was a hard-scrabble community of about 400 souls, surrounded by territories the Apache had called home for generations. Sarah Ellsworth had arrived just 2 years ago, a Boston doctor's daughter with delicate hands and education unusual for a woman. She'd followed her husband Thomas westward, carrying dreams of adventure and a small medical kit in her trunk. Thomas had promised her a new life, adventure, purpose. He hadn't mentioned his gambling habit. "Woman's got healing hands," Martha Bell, the town schoolteacher, had once remarked. "Shame she's wasting them washing a gambler's shirts." Thomas Ellsworth had charm and ambition, but lacked the patience that frontier life demanded. He tried his hand at storekeeping, then mining, then cattle, each venture abandoned when quick. Profits failed to materialize. With each failure, the gambling increased. First just friendly games at Simmons' saloon, then higher stakes tables in the back room, and finally desperate wagers with traveling merchants and cattlemen. 3 weeks ago, Thomas had disappeared. Some said he'd fled his debts. Others claimed Apache raiders had taken him. Sarah, 7 months pregnant at the time, had given birth alone with only Martha Bell to help her through it. The baby girl, Hannah, had come into the world small but strong-lunged. Then the banker, Harrison Holloway, had appeared at Sarah's door with papers. Thomas had used their home, their belongings, and, through some legal manipulation, even his wife and unborn child as collateral against his debts. In frontier justice, this was technically legal, if rarely enforced. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Ellsworth," Holloway had said, not meeting her eyes. "But the bank must recover its investments." The Apache bands that moved through the canyons surrounding Copper Creek had once traded regularly with the town. Chief Naich had established peaceful relations in the early days, but as the town struggled, tensions rose. Cattle went missing and were blamed on Apache raids. Water rights became contested. The army established a small outpost nearby, ostensibly for protection. Treaties were signed, then broken when silver was rumored in the mountains. The Apache were pushed further, into the canyons. Trading days became rare, tense affairs under the watchful eyes of army rifles. It was on such a trading day that Sarah and Hannah were brought to the auction block. Most of the townspeople looked away in shame. A few drunks jeered. The auctioneer, had brought in from a larger town down valley, didn't know Sarah personally, which made his job easier. What am I bid for this healthy woman and infant? Woman can cook, clean, and has some education. Infant female, appears healthy, will grow into useful service. The town charter's promise of equal prosperity had never seemed more hollow. Most of the traders and merchants looked uncomfortable, but several considered the economics of the situation. A woman with domestic skills had value on the frontier. Then the Apache warrior had stepped forward, his presence silencing the crowd. He was known to some as a nephew of old Chief Naich, one of the few who still occasionally came to trade. He wore his hair in traditional braids with a single eagle feather, carried himself with quiet dignity, and was known only by his Apache name, Gojo, meaning brave heart. No one expected him to place a bid. No one expected what happened. Next, the leather pouch he placed in the auctioneer's hand contained silver worth more than most Apache warriors would see in a lifetime. "Sold," the auctioneer said quietly, sensing something momentous and disturbing in this transaction. And with that simple word, Sarah and Hannah's fate changed forever. Sarah stumbled along the narrow path, her legs trembling with each step. The Apache warrior walked ahead, his moccasined feet finding purchase on stone and sand, where her worn boots slipped. The infant Hannah whimpered against her chest, face flushed with fever that had begun the previous night. "Please," Sarah said, her voice breaking the silence for the first time since they'd left town 2 hours earlier. "My baby needs rest, water." The warrior turned, his face impassive as he studied her. For a terrifying moment, Sarah wondered if he understood English at all. Then he nodded once and pointed to a juniper tree ahead, where the path widened slightly. "Tow," he said, making a drinking motion. "Water soon." Sarah collapsed gratefully in the shade, her back against rough bark. The late summer heat shimmered across the canyon walls, turning red stone to fiery waves. She watched as the warrior, Gojo, she had heard someone call him, scanned the horizon before kneeling to examine Hannah. His hand, when he reached toward the infant, was gentler than she expected. He touched Hannah's forehead, frowned, then reached into a small turquoise-studded pouch at his waist. He withdrew what looked like crushed leaves and bark, holding them up questioningly. "Medicine," he said in accented English, "for hot sickness." Sarah hesitated, her Boston upbringing warring with desperate circumstances. Everything she'd been told about savages screamed caution, yet this man had spent silver to purchase her. Freedom. Or had he purchased her servitude? His intentions remained a mystery. "Why?" she finally asked, gesturing between them. "Why did you buy us?" Gojo's dark eyes held hers for a long moment. "No one should be sold," he said simply. He waited, the medicine still extended in his palm. Sarah swallowed hard and nodded. He motioned for her to follow as he moved further along the path where the sound of water could now be heard. A small spring bubbled from the canyon wall, creating a pool barely larger than a wash basin before disappearing again into the earth. Gojo knelt, mixing the herbs with spring water in a wooden cup he carried. The liquid turned a pale green. "For child," he said, offering it to Sarah. "Cool fever." With trembling hands, Sarah took the cup and helped Hannah drink the bitter mixture. The baby grimaced but swallowed, immediately crying afterward. Sarah rocked her gently, her own thirst almost overwhelming. Gojo filled the cup again with clear water and handed it to Sarah. She drank gratefully, the water sweeter than any she'd tasted in Copper Creek's wells. "Thank you," she whispered. Hannah quieted in her arms. Sarah studied her benefactor or captor, she wasn't certain which. He appeared younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30, with a strong jaw and eyes that missed nothing. A scar ran along his left forearm, disappearing beneath a leather band decorated with geometric patterns. He wore buckskin leggings and a cotton shirt that looked to be of American make, traded for or taken in some past encounter. "How far?" she asked, gesturing ahead. "Sun touches mountains," he replied, pointing to the western horizon. Then home. Several more hours of walking then. Sarah took a deep breath and rose unsteadily to her feet. Gojo watched her with something that might have been respect before turning to lead onward. The path narrowed and steepened, winding between towering red walls. Occasionally, Gojo would pause, listening before continuing. Once he motioned urgently for silence. As the distant sound of hoofbeats echoed through the canyon, they pressed into a crevice until the sound faded. Riders from town already searching, perhaps. As the sun lowered, Hannah's whimpering subsided. The herbal remedy, whatever it contained, seemed to be helping. The child's forehead felt cooler against Sarah's chest, her breathing more regular. "Good medicine," Sarah said when they paused again at a bend in the canyon. Gojo nodded. "Apache no plants, no healing." He hesitated, then added, "Camp near. Food. Rest." Sarah felt a curious mix of fear and hope as they rounded the final bend, and she saw smoke rising from a small collection of wickiups nestled against the canyon wall. Her first glimpse of an Apache camp and what would become her temporary home. The Apache camp came alive with movement as Sarah and Gojo approached. Children stopped their play to stare. Women paused in their work, some frowning, others merely curious. An older boy ran ahead, calling out in Apache language. By the time they reached the circle of dome-shaped wickiups, a small crowd had gathered. An elderly woman emerged from the largest dwelling. Her silver hair braided with turquoise beads, her face deeply lined like the canyons themselves. She walked with the aid of a gnarled juniper staff, but held herself proudly. "Grandmother," Gojo said in English for Sarah's benefit, inclining his head respectfully. He spoke rapidly in Apache, gesturing towards Sarah and Hannah. The old woman, Nyanesgani, Sarah would later learn was her name, approached slowly, her dark eyes sharp and evaluating. She reached for Hannah without asking. Every instinct told Sarah to pull away, to protect her child from these strangers. Instead, she forced herself to stand still as the elder examined her baby. Nyanesgani nodded approvingly, then turned her attention to Sarah, noting her bruised arms, the exhaustion in her eyes. She spoke to Gojo, who translated. "Grandmother says you are strong to walk so far after giving birth. She says the baby needs better wrapping for canyon nights." Sarah nodded uncertainly. "Thank you for your concern." A younger woman stepped forward, perhaps a few years older than Sarah. She resembled Gojo enough to be a sister, with the same prominent cheekbones and direct gaze. "Nitsi," Gojo said. "My sister." Nitsi carried something wrapped in soft deerskin. She unwrapped it to reveal a beautifully crafted cradle board, decorated with geometric patterns in yellow, red, and black pigments. Small bells and feathers hung from the sides, and the headrest was padded with rabbit fur. For the baby, Gojo translated as Nitsi demonstrated how the cradle board worked. "Keep safe. Easier to carry." "It's beautiful," Sarah said, genuinely touched by the unexpected gift. "Please thank her." Gojo spoke to his sister, who smiled slightly before responding. "She says white women carry babies wrong. Cradle board makes baby strong, straight back, keeps safe from scorpions, snakes." Sarah smiled hesitantly at Nitsi. "I would be grateful to learn." The tension in the camp eased slightly. Children resumed their games, though they cast frequent glances at the white woman and her baby. The men returned to various tasks, repairing weapons, working with hides, keeping watch. The women continued food preparation, though Nyanesgani beckoned Sarah to join them. Nitsi showed Sarah how to secure Hannah in the cradle board, the baby fussing initially before settling into the snug embrace of the traditional carrier. Once Hannah was secure, the board could be propped against a tree or carried on Sarah's back, leaving her hands free for the first time in days. As evening approached, Sarah was given a place near the central fire. A stew of rabbit, wild onions, and unfamiliar roots was ladled into a clay bowl for her. She ate cautiously at first, then with increasing hunger, realizing she hadn't had a proper meal since before the auction. Gojo sat nearby, speaking occasionally with others, but clearly keeping watch over her. When Sarah caught his eye, he inclined his head slightly. "Safe here," he said simply. As darkness fell, more fires were lit. An older man began speaking, his voice rising and falling in cadences that reminded Sarah of the church sermons of her childhood. Though she couldn't understand the words, the rhythm was somehow comforting. "He tells story of creation," Gojo explained, sitting closer so he could speak quietly. "How first man and first woman came to be. How changing woman taught people to live in beauty." Sarah listened, watching faces illuminated by firelight. Despite the strange surroundings, the unfamiliar language, she felt the first fragile thread of connection forming. These people, so different from those in Copper Creek, had shown her more kindness in one day than she'd experienced in months. Later, as she was shown to a small wickiup prepared for her and Hannah, Sarah realized she'd gone hours without fear. The cradle board, with Hannah sleeping peacefully inside it, stood as a symbol of unexpected welcome in a place she'd been taught to dread. Sheriff Wade slammed his fist on Mayor Thornton's desk, sending dust motes dancing in the afternoon light. "Legal or not, we can't just let an Apache ride off with one of our women." Mayor Thornton adjusted his spectacles, looking more like the former accountant he was than a frontier leader. "The transaction was technically binding, Sheriff. Holloway had the papers in order." "Papers be damned," Wade growled. "What will people say? That Copper Creek lets savages purchase white women at auction?" The mayor sighed heavily. "What's done is done. The auctioneer confirmed the Apache paid in good silver, more than the debt required, actually." A wanted poster lay between them, on the desk, hastily drawn with Sarah's likeness and the words, "Woman and child taken by Apache, $50 reward for safe return," printed beneath. "This wasn't a kidnapping," Martha Bell said from the doorway where she'd been listening. The school teacher entered uninvited, her normally neat bun coming loose after a morning of corralling students. "Sarah was sold legally. Your law, not theirs, and that Apache saved her from worse fates right here in town." Sheriff Wade scowled. "Miss Bell, this doesn't concern you." "Doesn't it? Sarah was my friend. The only person in this town with medical knowledge beyond setting bones and pulling teeth." Martha crossed her arms. "And where were all you concerned men when Thomas Ellsworth was gambling away his family?" An uncomfortable silence fell. Outside, the noise of horses and men gathering could be heard. "The army should be involved," the sheriff finally said. "Lieutenant Cooper needs to be informed." As if summoned by his name, the door opened again to admit a young army officer. Lieutenant James Cooper was new to the frontier, his uniform still relatively crisp despite the dust of the trail. His posting to the small army camp outside Copper Creek was his first command. "Mayor, Sheriff." He nodded curtly. "I've heard there's been trouble with the Apache again. One of them purchased a white woman and her infant at auction," Sheriff Wade said before the mayor could speak. "Rode off with them toward the Red Canyons." Lieutenant Cooper's eyebrows rose. "Purchased, not abducted." "The distinction hardly matters," Wade insisted. "Sarah Ellsworth is one of our own." "One of your own that you put on the auction block," Martha interjected. The lieutenant looked between them, confusion evident. "I don't understand. Why would a woman be auctioned?" "Her husband's debts," Mayor Thornton explained uncomfortably. "He used her as collateral. When he disappeared, the bank exercised its right to reclaim the debt." Cooper frowned. "That's legal out here?" "Frontier justice has its own rules, Lieutenant," the sheriff said. "But the point is, she needs to be recovered." The door burst open, again admitting Harrison Holloway, the banker. His usual composure was noticeably absent, his face flushed. "Thomas Ellsworth is back," he announced without preamble. A stunned silence followed. "When?" the mayor finally asked. "Just rode in. He's at the saloon looking like he tangled with a mountain lion and lost." Martha Bell's expression hardened. "More likely he tangled with whoever he owes money to in Silver Springs." Sheriff Wade grabbed his hat. This changes things. If Ellsworth is back, he has legal rights to reclaim his wife. After he sold her? Martha's voice rose incredulously. He didn't sell her, Holloway corrected. He pledged her against debts. There's a legal distinction. Not to Sarah there isn't, Martha shot back. Lieutenant Cooper cleared his throat. Regardless of the legal complexities, if a white woman is with the Apache, voluntarily or not, I have a duty to investigate. His hand rested on his holstered pistol. I'll gather some of my men. I'll organize a search party from town. Sheriff. Wade added, we'll leave at first light tomorrow. Martha Bell watched them file out, her mouth set in a grim line. None of them had asked the question that seemed most obvious to her. What if Sarah Ellsworth didn't want to be rescued? She turned toward the schoolhouse, her mind made up. She would need supplies and a good horse if she was going to reach Sarah. Before the men did, someone needed to warn her and to hear her choice. Dawn broke over the canyon rim, painting the stone walls with amber light. Sarah woke to the sounds of the camp already active. Soft voices, the crack of kindling being broken for morning fires, a child's laughter. For a moment, disorientation clouded her mind before memory returned. She was not in Copper Creek. She was among the Apache. Hannah stirred in her cradleboard, her eyes blinking open. Sarah marveled at how well the baby had slept, better than any night since her birth. Perhaps there was wisdom in these strange customs after all. Good day. Nitsi appeared at the wiki-up entrance, her hands full with a clay water jar. She set it down near Sarah. "Toh," she said, pointing to the water. "Wash." Sarah nodded gratefully. "Thank you." "He," she attempted, using the Apache word for thanks that she'd heard the previous evening. Nitsi's eyes widened slightly. Then she smiled, the first genuine smile Sarah had seen from her. She gestured for Sarah to follow once she was ready. Outside, the camp moved with purpose. Women ground seeds between stones. Men prepared for hunting. Children carried water from a nearby spring. Everyone, even the youngest, seemed to have a role Gojo approached as Sarah emerged with Hannah. "You sleep well?" he asked in his limited English. "Yes, thank you, Hannah too." He nodded, pleased. "Today, you learn water." He pointed to several women heading toward the spring with empty jars. "Go with Nitsi." Sarah followed Gojo's sister, Hannah securing the cradleboard on her back. The women walked single file along a narrow path that wound behind the camp. One carried a digging stick, another a basket. None spoke, but they moved with confident familiarity through the landscape. The spring emerged from a crevice in the rock face, creating a small pool before trickling away down the canyon. The women filled their water jars first, moving with an efficiency born of daily practice. Then, to Sarah's surprise, they began digging in the damp soil near the spring's edge. "Cattail," Nitsi explained, holding up a thick root. "Food." She pantomimed washing, cutting, and eating. Sarah watched carefully as the women harvested the plants, noting which parts they took and which they left. When Nitsi handed her the digging stick, Sarah awkwardly attempted to copy their technique, earning approving nods when she successfully unearthed a cattail root. On the walk back, Nitsi stopped to point out various plants. "Medicine," she would say, or "no-eat." Simple English words matched with important knowledge. Sarah tried to commit each to memory, knowing such information could mean survival. At midday, Grandmother Nyanesgani summoned Sarah to her wiki-up. The elder sat working a lump of clay, her gnarled fingers still dexterous. She patted the ground beside her, indicating Sarah should sit and watch. For the next hour, Sarah observed as Nyanesgani demonstrated how to create a water jar. The old woman shaped the clay with practiced movements, thinning the walls by pressing a smooth stone against the surface as she turned the vessel. She showed Sarah how to polish the surface with a river stone and carve simple designs with a pointed stick. When she finished, Nyanesgani passed a lump of clay to Sarah. "You make," she said in heavily accented English. Sarah's first attempt collapsed quickly, earning a chuckle from the old woman. Her second fared better. By the third try, she had created a small, lopsided jar that nonetheless held its shape. Nyanesgani nodded approvingly. "Good hands," she said, touching Sarah's fingers. "Healer hands." That evening, as they gathered around the fire, Gojo sat beside Sarah. "You learn fast," he observed. "Most white people, they think Apache ways simple. Not simple. Old. Wise." "How? Do you speak English?" Sarah asked, curiosity finally overcoming her caution. "Mission school, 2 summers." His expression darkened. "They try make me not Apache. But you came back." He nodded. "This is home. My people." He looked at her thoughtfully. "Your people hurt you." The directness of the question startled her. "My husband did," she admitted. "He gambled, he drank. When I told him about the baby, he changed." Gojo was silent for a moment. "Why, I buy you," he finally said. "A trading post, I see your eyes. I see," he struggled for the word, "broken spirit. Like horses when whipped too much, no one should own another. Why bring me here?" Sarah asked. "You could have just set us free. Winter coming. Woman alone with baby." He shook his head. "Not survive." The simple truth of his words settled over Sarah. In her world, a woman alone had few options. Here, at least, she and Hannah had food, shelter, and a strange new form of respect. First light had barely crested the eastern ridge when the search party gathered at the edge of Copper Creek. Lieutenant Cooper sat ramrod straight on his army-issued. Bay gelding, flanked by 3 soldiers, similarly mounted. Sheriff Wade checked his Winchester repeater before sliding it into his saddle scabbard, while 4 townsmen made final adjustments to their gear. Thomas Ellsworth stood apart, his face a patchwork of healing bruises, one arm held stiffly at his side. He'd insisted on joining despite his obvious injuries, claiming a husband's right to reclaim his wife. He looked ill-suited to the trail in his city clothes, but his eyes held a desperate intensity. "Remember," Lieutenant Cooper addressed the group, "our primary goal is to locate and recover Mrs. Ellsworth and her child. We are not looking for a fight with the Apache." Sheriff Wade snorted softly. "Tell that to the Apache." The lieutenant ignored him, instead removing a brass compass from his pocket and checking their bearing. "We'll follow the southern canyon route. Tracker says that's the direction they headed." "The warrior who took her is called Gojo," Thomas interjected. "I heard it at the saloon. Supposedly trades sometimes. Nephew of old Chief Naiche." "You seem well informed for a man who wasn't present when his wife was sold," Wade commented dryly. Thomas flushed but said nothing. As the party moved out, none noticed Martha Bell watching from the shadow of the livery stable. She counted to 100 after they departed, then mounted her own horse, a sturdy pinto borrowed from the widow Jensen, and set out on a different trail. Martha knew these canyons better than most. While the men would follow the obvious path, she would take the old game trails that cut through the high country. By mid-morning, the search party had entered the maze of canyons that stretched red and gold beneath the cloudless sky. Heat rose in shimmering waves from stone that had baked under the sun for millennia. Water was already becoming a concern. "There's a trading post at Broken Axle Creek," Sheriff Wade suggested. "About 4 hours' ride. They might have information." Lieutenant Cooper consulted his map, then nodded. "Mr. Ellsworth, you've been quiet. These are your wife and child we're seeking. Any thoughts on our direction?" Thomas shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "I trust your judgment, Lieutenant." One of the soldiers, a man named Davis, who'd been on the frontier for years, spoke up. "Begging your pardon, sir, but most Apache camps move with the seasons. If they've taken the woman to their summer camp, they'll be near water in the high canyons. You seem knowledgeable about Indian habits, Private," Cooper noted. 5 years on Apache scout detail before this posting, sir." Cooper nodded thoughtfully. "Then you'll ride point with me." As they penetrated deeper into the canyon country, signs of human passage became harder to find. Twice they thought they'd found tracks, only to lose them on stretches of bare stone. The heat grew oppressive. Canteens were drained and refilled. At infrequent springs, at midday, they encountered another Apache band, 4 hunters returning with a deer carcass. The meeting was tense, weapons visible, but not aimed. Lieutenant Cooper, to his credit, attempted diplomacy. "We seek a white woman, and her child taken by one called Gojo," he said, speaking slowly and clearly. The hunters' faces remained impassive. The oldest among them, his hair streaked with grey, responded in halting English. "Many Apache, many canyons." He gestured broadly at the vast landscape. "Go back to your town. This not your place." "The woman is my wife," Thomas said, urging his horse forward. "I have rights." The Apache hunter looked at him with unconcealed contempt. "Man who sells woman has no rights to her." Thomas's face darkened. "I didn't sell her. That wasn't my intention." "Intention like wind," the hunter replied. "Only action remains." He signaled to his companions, and they moved past the search party without further comment. "Should we follow them?" Sheriff Wade asked, his hand resting on his pistol. Lieutenant Cooper shook his head. "They're not leading us to their camp. We'd be wasting our time." He consulted his compass again. "We push north. Private Davis, what's your assessment?" "Water's scarce in this section, sir. We should reach Broken Axle by nightfall if we keep moving. Maybe get better information there." As they rode on, Thomas Ellsworth's composure began to crack. "What if we don't find her?" he asked, no one in particular. "What if she doesn't want to come back?" No one answered him. The question hung in the air like the dust from their horses' hooves, settling uncomfortably on each man's conscience. 2 weeks passed like water flowing through the canyon, sometimes rushing, sometimes pooling in moments of unexpected stillness. Sarah's hands, once soft from Boston parlors, now bore calluses from gathering firewood and digging roots. Her fair skin had darkened under the relentless sun, and her movements had taken on the deliberate efficiency of the Apache women. "Shoo!" Sarah repeated after Nitsi, pointing to a mountain. "Two," she continued, indicating the small stream where they collected water. The Apache words felt strange on her tongue, but she persisted, knowing language was her bridge to survival. Nitsi smiled, nodding encouragement. From a small pouch at her waist, she withdrew a necklace of polished stone beads, turquoise and white shell, alternating in a pattern that reminded Sarah of flowing water. Without ceremony, she placed it around Sarah's neck. "Sister," Nitsi said, simply touching the necklace, then her own heart. Sarah's eyes filled with unexpected tears. "Thank you," she whispered, touching the beads reverently. He. Later that afternoon, as they prepared piñon nuts for storage, Sarah found herself working alongside Gojo's mother, a quiet woman who rarely spoke but watched everything with intelligent eyes. Hannah lay nearby in her cradleboard, happily, batting at the small wooden toys Gojo had carved for her. "Your child grows strong," the older woman commented, her English surprising Sarah. "Yes, she does. The Apache heir agrees with her." "You were at auction," the woman said, her hands never pausing in their work. "Why?" The direct question caught Sarah off guard, but she'd learned that Apache communication valued honesty over politeness. "My husband, Thomas, he borrowed money, used me as payment if he couldn't repay." "This is white man's law?" Sarah hesitated. "It's a misuse of white man's law. But yes, in frontier towns, sometimes such things happen." The woman nodded thoughtfully. "When Gojo was small, his father traded with white settlers. Good man, fair trades, army soldiers killed him, said he stole horses." Her voice remained even, but her eyes held old pain. "No horses were missing, just wanted Apache land." "I'm sorry," Sarah said, inadequate words for such injustice. "Gojo saw, 10 summers old, became angry boy, wanted revenge." She carefully sorted the nuts into a basket. "His grandfather taught him better way. Revenge like drinking poison," he said. "Doesn't hurt enemy, hurts you." Sarah glanced toward where Gojo sat with the other men repairing weapons. "Is that why he helped us? To find a better way?" The woman met her eyes. He saw woman treated like property, remembered his father treated like animal, could not stand silent. That evening, around the communal fire, Gojo sat beside Sarah. For several minutes they watched the flames in companionable silence. "Why were you in Copper Creek that day?" Sarah finally asked. "Trading day was the previous week." "Came to warn," he replied. "Army moving in Northern Valley, breaking treaty again." His profile was sharp against the firelight. "Saw auction, saw you. You spent a great deal of silver." He shrugged slightly. "Silver is metal. Life is sacred." "In Boston," Sarah said softly, "I trained with my father, a doctor. He taught me about medicines, healing herbs. Not much use for a woman's knowledge in Copper Creek." Gojo considered this. "Our medicine women have power, respect, knowledge passed mother to daughter for many generations." He gestured toward grandmother Nyanesgani. "She knows plants, ceremonies, songs for healing. Songs? Everything has spirit," he explained. "Plants, animals, stone, water. Healing means finding right song to restore balance." He looked at her curiously. "White doctors not use songs?" Sarah smiled. "Not usually, though prayer is not so different, perhaps." A sudden commotion at the edge of camp interrupted their conversation. Two young hunters entered, speaking rapidly to the men. Sarah caught Gojo's expression, changing from interest to concern. "What is it?" she asked. "Search party," he replied grimly. "From your town, looking for you." Sarah's breath caught. "How far?" "2 days, maybe less." He studied her face. "You afraid?" The question made her pause. 2 weeks ago she would have said yes without hesitation. Now, with the beaded necklace cool against her skin and Hannah thriving in this strange new world, the answer was more complicated. "Not of staying here," she said finally, "but of being forced to return." Gojo nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Tomorrow we prepare." He touched the knife at his belt. "No one takes you against your will again." The search party's campfire cast long shadows against the canyon walls. Lieutenant Cooper studied his map by the flickering light, while the other men prepared a sparse dinner of hardtack and jerky. Their water supplies were running dangerously low. "We should reach Broken Axle Creek by noon tomorrow," Cooper announced. "We can resupply there and get fresh information." Sheriff Wade nodded, chewing grimly on the tough jerky. If the Apache Hunter was telling the truth, we might be wasting our time in this direction. Thomas Ellsworth sat apart from the others, staring into the darkness. The bruises on his face had yellowed at the edges, giving him a sickly appearance in the firelight. Private Davis approached, offering a cup of coffee. "Drink up, Mr. Ellsworth. Cold night ahead." Thomas accepted the cup with a nod. "Do you think—" "We'll find them, Private," Davis settled beside him. "Apache know this country better than any white man. If they don't want to be found—" He let the implication hang. "I need to find her," Thomas said, his voice tight with an emotion Davis couldn't quite identify. "There are papers, documents in her possession." "Documents," Thomas caught himself. "Family matters, nothing important to anyone else." Sheriff Wade approached, having overheard the exchange. "Seems a lot of effort for some family papers, Ellsworth." His tone was casual, but his eyes were sharp. "Mind telling me what really happened before you disappeared 3 weeks ago?" Thomas tensed. "I've explained already. I went to Silver Springs to seek new business opportunities, was robbed on the return journey." Wade sat down, uninvited. "Funny. Thing. Had a wire from the sheriff in Silver Springs yesterday before we left. Says you were involved in a high-stakes poker game at the Red Lady Saloon. Says you lost badly to some cattle buyers from Texas." The color drained from Thomas's face. "That's not—" "Says you offered unusual collateral when you ran out of cash. A deed to a silver mine in the Apache territories. Only problem is, there's no registered silver mine in your name." Private Davis whistled softly. "That's a hanging offense in some places, selling false deeds." Thomas's hands trembled so badly he had to set down his coffee cup. "It wasn't false." "Not exactly." Lieutenant Cooper had drawn closer, listening. "Explain yourself, Mr. Ellsworth." Thomas looked trapped. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "There is silver. In the high canyons on Apache land. I found samples last year while hunting." He reached into his coat and withdrew a small leather pouch. Inside were several chunks of ore, gleaming dully in the firelight. "I was planning to file a proper claim, but the land surveys haven't reached that far yet." Sheriff Wade's expression hardened. "So you sold a deed you had no right to sell, for land that isn't yours, to men who won't take kindly to discovering they've been swindled." "I was going to make it right," Thomas insisted. "I just needed time to organize a proper mining operation." When I went back to Silver Springs to explain, they expressed their displeasure. He gestured to his bruised face. "They gave me 2 weeks to produce either the silver or their money with interest." "And that's when you decided your wife would make suitable payment for your debts," Lieutenant Cooper said coldly. Thomas flinched. "It wasn't like that. Harrison Holloway suggested it. Said frontier law allowed for family members to be held as security against debts in certain circumstances." His voice became pleading. "I never thought they'd actually sell her. I just needed something to buy more time." Sheriff Wade spat into the fire. "You're a sorry excuse for a man, Ellsworth." "You don't understand." Thomas's voice rose desperately. "Sarah has my map, the detailed location of the silver deposit. I drew it while I was there and kept it hidden in our Bible. She always took that Bible everywhere." He ran a shaking hand through his hair. "That map is worth a fortune. If the Apache find it, so this isn't about rescuing your wife at all." Lieutenant Cooper interrupted, disgust evident in his voice. "It's about recovering a map to silver on Apache land. Silver that, by treaty, isn't yours to claim." From the shadows beyond the firelight, Martha Bell silently backed away. She'd found the search party's trail that afternoon and had been cautiously observing them. Now she had the information she needed. Mounting her horse, she turned toward the high canyons where the Apache summer camps would be located. She had to reach Sarah before these men did, especially now that she knew what Thomas was really after. Sarah woke in the pre-dawn darkness, her body burning with fever. The night air felt impossibly cold against her skin, yet sweat soaked her borrowed deerskin dress. She tried to rise to check on Hannah, but dizziness forced her back down onto the sleeping mats. "Hannah," she called weakly. The effort triggered a fit of coughing that tore at her chest. The wiki-up entrance rustled as Nitsi entered, her expression changing to alarm when she saw Sarah's condition. She called out sharply, and within moments Grandmother Nayenesgani appeared, her ancient hands cool against Sarah's forehead. "Fever spirit," the old woman pronounced grimly. She spoke rapidly to Nitsi, who hurried out. Sarah tried to ask about Hannah, but could only manage a hoarse whisper. Nayenesgani seemed to understand, gesturing reassuringly toward where the cradleboard stood. "Child good, you sick, need medicine song." More people entered the wiki-up. Gojo knelt beside Sarah, concern etched on his face. He spoke with his grandmother, then turned to Sarah. "You very sick, water sickness maybe, we will help." Through the haze of fever, Sarah registered that she had likely contracted something from unfiltered water, typhoid perhaps, or a similar frontier ailment that had claimed many settlers' lives. In Boston, her father would have administered willow bark tea, cool compresses, and fervent prayers. Here she was at the mercy of unfamiliar medicines and ancient practices. Gojo lifted her gently, supporting her weight as they helped her from the wiki-up. Outside, the camp was stirring, with urgent purpose. A larger fire than usual burned at the center, and several men were constructing what looked like a small dome of bent saplings covered with blankets. A sweat lodge, Sarah realized through her delirium. "Too weak," she protested. "Can't sweat cure." "Not for you," Gojo explained. "For medicine man." He prepared to find your healing song. They settled her on a pallet of soft hides near the fire. Hannah, still sleeping peacefully in her cradleboard, was placed nearby under Nitsi's watchful eye. An elderly man approached, his face painted. With red and white stripes, carrying a small drum made of stretched hide over a ceramic vessel. This, Sarah realized, must be the medicine man Gojo had mentioned. The medicine man examined Sarah without touching her, moving his hands above her body as if tracing the contours of something only he could see. He spoke quietly to Nyanesgani, who nodded gravely. "What's happening?" Sarah whispered to Gojo, who remained by her side. "He sees where sickness spirit entered. Now he goes to spirit world to find right song to drive it out." The medicine man entered the sweat lodge, taking his drum with him. As the flap closed behind him, low, rhythmic drumming began. Nyanesgani supervised the preparation of various medicines. Bitter-smelling teas were brewed, poultices of crushed herbs were mixed, and a paste of clay and plant matter was prepared. Sarah submitted to their ministrations, too weak to resist as the old woman painted symbols on her forehead and chest with the clay mixture. As the sun rose, Sarah's fever worsened. She drifted in and out of consciousness, vaguely aware of concerned faces surrounding her. In her delirium, she thought she saw her father standing among the Apache, nodding approvingly at their methods. "Papa," she murmured. "I remembered the willow bark." Gojo held her hand tightly as she thrashed, his voice a steady anchor in her fevered dreams. "Stay with us, Sarah. Fight spirit." From the sweat lodge, the drumming suddenly stopped. A moment later, the medicine man emerged, his body gleaming with sweat, his eyes unfocused, as if seeing beyond the physical world. He carried his drum reverently to where Sarah lay and began a soft, insistent rhythm. Then he sang, a melody unlike anything Sarah had heard before. It rose and fell like the wind through canyon walls, like water over stone. Others joined, Nyanesgani's aged voice blending with Nitzi's higher tones and the deeper resonance of the men. Even small children added their voices. In her fever dreams, Sarah saw the sound as color, blue-green tendrils wrapping around her, drawing out the burning red of the sickness. Hannah woke and began to fuss, her cries somehow harmonizing with the strange, compelling melody. Gojo leaned close to Sarah's ear. "My wife, my son, taken by fever 3 summers ago," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "No song could save them. But you will live. You must." The revelation penetrated Sarah's delirium. This man, who had saved her from one form of bondage, was fighting desperately to save her from another, fighting against the memory of his own loss. "Sing," she whispered. "Teach me the song." And though her voice was weak, Sarah joined the healing. Chorus, her Western hymnal traditions merging with Apache medicine in a new harmony that seemed to echo through the canyon walls. The dawn, following Sarah's fever crisis, brought cautious relief to the Apache camp. The healing ceremony had continued through the night, the medicine drum beating like a second heart until the first light touched the canyon rim. Sarah's fever had broken in those grey hours between night and morning, her breathing steadying as the sweat of healing rather than sickness dampened her skin. She sat now, weak but alert, sipping a bitter tea under Nyanesgani's watchful eye. Hannah played. Nearby, seemingly unaffected by the previous day's drama, the camp had returned to its normal rhythms, though Sarah noticed extra sentries posted on the ridge above, Gojo's precaution against the approaching search party. The warning cry came shortly before midday, a sharp, bird-like call from the western lookout. The camp mobilized instantly, women gathering children, men reaching for weapons. Gojo appeared at Sarah's side, a rifle in his hands. "Stay in Wickiup," he instructed. "One rider, maybe scout." Sarah clutched Hannah to her chest, her heart pounding with fresh fear. Had they found her so quickly? Was Thomas among them? The tension broke unexpectedly when a woman's voice called out, "Sarah! Sarah Ellsworth!" "Martha?" Sarah whispered in disbelief. She struggled to her feet, ignoring Gojo's restraining hand. "Martha Bell!" She emerged from the Wickiup to see her friend, dusty and exhausted, being escorted into the camp by 2 Apache warriors. Martha's normally neat appearance was disheveled, her hair escaping its pins, her riding skirt torn at the hem. But her face lit up at the sight of Sarah. "Thank God," Martha exclaimed. "You're alive. And the baby—" "She's well," Sarah confirmed, shifting Hannah to her hip. "How did you find us?" "No time for that," Martha said urgently. "I've been tracking the search party for 2 days. They're less than half a day behind me. Sheriff Wade, Lieutenant Cooper, and some soldiers. And Thomas, Utace." The mention of her husband's name, Sarah's arms tightened around Hannah. Gojo stepped forward, his expression wary but not hostile. "You friend?" he asked Martha directly. "Yes," Martha replied without hesitation. "I came to warn Sarah. They're coming, but not for the reasons they claim." Gojo signaled to his men, giving rapid instructions in Apache. 2 riders immediately set out, presumably to scout the approaching party's position. He then guided both women to the central fire pit where several elders had gathered. "Tell," he said to Martha, "all must hear." Martha sank gratefully onto a offered blanket, accepting a water skin from Nitsi. "Thomas isn't coming for you out of concern," she said, meeting Sarah's eyes directly. "He needs something he thinks you have, a map to a silver deposit in these canyons. He claims he hid it in your Bible." Sarah frowned. "My Bible? I brought it with me, but there's no—" She paused, remembering the thin, folded paper she'd discovered, pressed between the pages of Psalms, and had used as a bookmark. She hadn't paid it any attention. "He sold a false deed to some gamblers in Silver Springs," Martha continued. "They beat him when they realized the claim wasn't registered. Now he's desperate to find the actual silver to save himself." The Apache elders conferred rapidly among themselves after Gojo translated. Grandmother Nayenisgani spoke at length, her weathered hands gesturing toward the surrounding canyon walls. "What is she saying?" Sarah asked. "She says silver has been known to the people for generations," Gojo translated. "Sacred places, not for digging or selling. Your husband has violated sacred land." The implications settled heavily over the group. Sarah closed her eyes briefly, a wave of shame washing over her for Thomas's actions. "We must call council," one of the elder men decided. "Decide what to do." While the elders gathered, Nayenisgani approached Sarah with something in her hand. A single eagle feather, its shaft wrapped in red thread. "Choose path," the old woman said, pressing the feather into Sarah's palm. "Stay with people or return to town. Truth feather will guide." "What if I stay?" Sarah asked. "Will there be trouble?" "For your people?" Gojo translated the question for his grandmother, then relayed her answer. "She says trouble comes whether you stay or go. Silver always brings trouble, but the people have survived many troubles." Martha watched the exchange with fascination. "Sarah, are you actually considering staying? These aren't your people." Sarah looked around the camp, at Nitsi, who had become like a sister, at Nayenisgani, who had taught her with patient wisdom, at the children who now included Hannah in their games. Finally, her gaze rested on Gojo, who had risked everything. "To save a stranger, they became my people when no one else would claim me," she said softly. "They offered dignity when my own husband sold me like cattle." The eagle feather was smooth beneath her fingers, its meaning clear. This was no longer about escaping Thomas or the shame of the auction block. This was about choosing a path forward for herself and for Hannah. "Tell them I stay," she said. "To Gojo, and that I will help protect the sacred places from those who would destroy them for profit." The gathering clouds had been building all afternoon, transforming from white wisps to dark, towering anvils that loomed over the canyon walls. The Apache elders had noted the signs with growing concern. Unusual stillness, birds flying low, a heaviness in the air that pressed against the skin like a wet blanket. "Bad storm coming," Gojo announced as the council broke up. "Must prepare camp." With practiced efficiency, the tribe began securing everything that might blow away. Extra stakes were driven to anchor the wiki-ups. Precious food stores were moved to higher ground. The children were gathered at the center of camp under the watchful eyes of the oldest women. "What can I do?" Sarah asked, her strength returning but still limited after her fever. "Watch Hannah," Gojo replied, "and help grandmother with medicine bundles. May need after storm." Martha Bell worked alongside the Apache women, her school teacher's instincts making her especially attentive to the smallest children. She had made her choice to stay with Sarah, at least until the immediate crisis passed. The first fat raindrops fell just as the last preparations were completed. Within minutes, the rain transformed from scattered drops to a solid wall of water, driven horizontally by howling winds that funneled through the canyon. Thunder crashed overhead, its booming echoes multiplied by the stone walls surrounding them. "Never seen storm like this," Nitsi shouted over the deluge as she joined Sarah in Nyanesgani's wickiup, which served as both shelter and medicine lodge. The old woman nodded grimly, handling a ceremonial rainstick adorned with feathers and carved symbols. She turned it slowly, producing a sound like gentle rainfall, a stark contrast to the violent downpour outside. Her lips moved in prayer, or incantation. Through the wickiup's entrance, Sarah watched the storm's fury with mounting concern. The stream that meandered peacefully near camp had already swollen to twice its normal width, its waters turning from clear to muddy brown. "The canyon," she said suddenly, remembering lessons from her father about flash floods in desert regions. "If too much rain comes too quickly." As if summoned by her words, a shout of alarm came from the lookout point. Gojo appeared at the wickiup entrance, water streaming from his hair and clothing. "Flash flood," he confirmed. "Must move to high ground, now." The evacuation proceeded with remarkable order despite the chaos of elements. Children were distributed among the strongest adults. Essential medicines and sacred items were quickly gathered. The tribe moved as one toward a steep path that led to a shelf of rock 30 feet above the canyon floor. Sarah carried Hannah, while Martha helped Nyanesgani navigate the slippery path. The rain continued to pound them, making each step treacherous. Halfway up, Sarah heard a child's scream cut through the storm's roar. A small boy, no more than 4 years old, had slipped from his mother's grasp and tumbled back down the muddy slope. Worse, a wall of water was now visible at the far end of the canyon, a churning mass of debris and floodwater heading directly toward the camp. Without thinking, Sarah thrust Hannah into Martha's arms and scrambled down the path. Her feet slid in the mud, sending her tumbling the last few yards, but she managed to reach the terrified child just as the first surge of floodwater reached the camp's edge. "Hold tight!" she shouted, lifting the boy as the water swirled around her knees, then her waist. The current was already strong enough to make standing difficult. From above, Gojo descended in a controlled slide, a rope secured around his waist and anchored to a boulder above. He reached Sarah and the boy just as a massive surge threatened to sweep them away. "Take him!" Sarah cried, lifting the child toward Gojo's outstretched arms. With the boy secure, Gojo wrapped one powerful arm around Sarah's waist. "Climb!" he shouted as those above began pulling on the rope. They were barely halfway up when a section of the path collapsed beneath them. Sarah felt herself falling, heard Gojo's shout of alarm, then a jarring halt as the rope held. They dangled for heart-stopping moments before hands reached down to pull them to safety. As they collapsed on the rocky shelf, Sarah looked back to see the entire camp disappearing beneath a roiling torrent of mud and debris. Wickiups were torn away like toys, the central fire pit extinguished in an instant. Had they delayed even minutes longer, none would have survived. "All here?" Gojo asked, conducting a rapid count of his people. "All safe," Nitsi confirmed, though many bore minor injuries from the frantic climb. Sarah reclaimed Hannah from Martha, holding her daughter close as she surveyed the devastation below. "Everything is gone," she whispered. "Things can be remade." Nyanesgani said with surprising serenity, "People cannot." Miles away, the search party was caught in the same deluge, their ordered progress disintegrating into a desperate fight for survival. Lieutenant Cooper shouted commands that were lost in the storm's fury as men and horses scattered for any available. "A shelter." "The canyon," Sheriff Wade warned, pointing to the narrow defile they'd been about to enter. "It'll flood." Cooper nodded grimly, redirecting his remaining men toward higher ground. In the confusion, no one noticed when Thomas Ellsworth spurred his horse directly into the canyon, determined to reach the Apache camp and the silver map, regardless of the danger. Nor did they immediately realize that 3 of their party, Lieutenant Cooper and 2 soldiers, had been separated and swept downstream by a particularly violent surge of water carried directly toward the place they had been seeking all along. Dawn broke over a transformed landscape. The storm had passed during the night, leaving behind a canyon floor scoured clean of the Apache camp. What had been a peaceful stream was now a swollen river of mud, churning with uprooted trees, fragments of wickiups, and the scattered remnants of daily life. The tribe huddled on their rocky shelf, cold and damp but alive. Children slept fitfully against parents and elders. The medicine man moved among them, treating injuries with the few supplies they'd managed to salvage. Sarah and Martha stood with Gojo at the edge of the shelf, surveying the destruction below. "What will you do now?" Martha asked. "Move to winter camp earlier than planned," Gojo replied. "High Meadow, half-day's journey north, safer there." A shout from one of the sentries interrupted their conversation. The man pointed urgently toward a bend in the canyon where the floodwaters formed a natural collection point for debris. 3 figures were visible, clinging to a large cottonwood trunk that had lodged against a boulder. "Men in water," Gojo said, shading his eyes against the rising sun. His expression hardened. "Blue coats, army." Sarah squinted at the distant figures. "Lieutenant Cooper?" she murmured. From the search party, the Apache warriors conferred quickly, some arguing for leaving the soldiers to their fate, others urging caution. Gojo listened to all views before speaking. "These men come to take you back," he said to Sarah. "Maybe force you. Why should we help?" Sarah considered this. "Because choosing not to help would make you like those who have wronged your people," she said finally. "And because I don't believe Lieutenant Cooper is like Thomas. He seems honorable, even if misguided." Gojo studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. "We will help, but carefully. The rescue was a delicate operation. 2 strong swimmers from the tribe navigated the still dangerous current with ropes secured to the shore. The soldiers, exhausted and half-drowned, could barely assist in their own rescue. One by one, they were pulled to the canyon's edge, where other warriors helped hold them up to the rocky shelf. Lieutenant Cooper was the last to be rescued, his uniform torn and his left arm clearly broken. As he was dragged onto solid ground, he blinked in confusion at his surroundings and then froze at the sight of the Apache warriors surrounding him. "Easy, Lieutenant," Sarah said, stepping forward. "They've saved your life." Cooper's eyes widened in shock. "Mrs. Ellsworth, you're alive." "No thanks to my husband," she replied coolly. The lieutenant struggled to sit up, wincing as his broken arm shifted. He looked around at the assembled Apache, noting the children and elders among them, the meager salvaged supplies. His gaze returned to Sarah, who stood confidently beside Gojo, her baby secured in the cradle board on her back. "You weren't abducted," Cooper said slowly, the reality of the situation dawning on him. "You're here by choice." "I am now," Sarah confirmed. "Though my initial departure from Copper Creek was not of my choosing, as I believe you know." Cooper had the grace to look ashamed. "The auction. Yes, I heard." He glanced at his 2 soldiers, who lay nearby receiving reluctant medical attention from Nayenes Gunny. "We were told you needed rescue." "By my husband, who sold me to settle gambling debts," Sarah said. "A husband who now seeks a map he believes I possess, a map to silver deposits on Apache land." The lieutenant's expression grew troubled. Ellsworth mentioned documents, but not— He stopped, seeming to reconsider his words. Mrs. Ellsworth, regardless of the circumstances, my duty is to escort you back to Copper Creek, if that is your wish. It is not. Cooper nodded slowly, then noticed something at his feet. His rifle, broken nearly in half, likely damaged during his turbulent journey downstream. The weapon, symbol of his authority and power, lay useless in the mud. Gojo had been watching this exchange silently. Now he stepped forward, addressing Cooper directly. You are enemies in our land. Why should we not take your weapons, leave you to walk back to your fort? Cooper met his gaze steadily. Because I give you my word as an officer that we mean no harm to your people, only to find this woman and her child. He gestured to his broken arm. We are at your mercy, regardless. A tense silence fell as the two leaders measured each other. Sarah moved between them. Lieutenant Cooper, may I introduce Gojo, who purchased my freedom when my own townspeople would not help me. She turned to Gojo. And this is Lieutenant James Cooper, who I believe is a man of honor, even if he serves those who have broken their promises to your people. Gojo considered this, then made a decision. You will stay until arms heal, then we decide. He gestured to the medicine man to attend to Cooper's broken arm. But first you tell us, where is rest of search party? Where is husband who sells his wife? Cooper's face darkened. Scattered by the storm, Sheriff Wade and the others were heading for higher ground. He hesitated. Ellsworth, I cannot say. He rode ahead just before the flood hit. Sarah and Gojo exchanged concerned glances. Somewhere out in the canyons, Thomas was still searching. Not for his wife, but for silver that could cost the Apache their sacred lands. 3 days passed before Lieutenant Cooper's arm was strong enough for travel. During that time, the Apache had relocated to their winter camp in the high meadow, a journey made more difficult by the flood damage to familiar trails. The soldiers, under Gojo's watchful eye, had proven themselves useful despite their injuries, helping to construct new shelters and carry supplies. On the morning of the 4th day, a council gathered around the central fire. Cooper, his arm bound in a splint, fashioned by Nyanesgani, sat opposite Gojo and the tribal elders. Sarah and Martha sat to one side, Hannah sleeping peacefully in her cradleboard. The storm has changed many things, Gojo began, his English careful but clear for the benefit of their guests. Your search party will think you dead. They will tell your commanders. Cooper nodded. My duty is to return and report what I've learned. And what have you learned, Lieutenant? Sarah asked quietly. Cooper met her gaze steadily. That I was misled about your situation, Mrs. Ellsworth. That this man, he gestured to Gojo, acted with more honor than many in Copper Creek. And that your husband's true motives involve silver, not concern for your welfare. Will you tell the town this truth? Martha pressed. I will, Cooper confirmed, though I'm not certain they'll believe me without evidence. Gojo conferred briefly with the elders before speaking again. We have decided. I will take small party to Copper Creek with you. Show town that Apache not take woman and child. Show that woman choose to stay or go by her own will. Murmurs of surprise rippled through the gathering. Such a journey was unprecedented and potentially dangerous. Gojo, they may try to arrest you, Sarah warned, or worse. This is why you come too, he replied. You must speak truth to your people. Sarah's heart raced. The thought of returning to Copper Creek filled her with dread. Yet she recognized the wisdom in Gojo's plan. If they remained in hiding, Thomas's lies would stand unchallenged. The search parties would continue, perhaps leading to violence. Only by confronting the situation directly could they hope for resolution. I'll go, she agreed, on one condition. The map Thomas seeks, I found it in my Bible. Before we leave, I want to show the tribal elders where this silver deposit is, located so they can protect it. Gojo translated her words, causing intense discussion among the elders. Finally, Nyanesgani spoke directly to Sarah. "Silver place is sacred," the old woman said. "Not for digging, selling. You show us then. We show you something important." Later that day, Sarah spread the crude map on a flat stone. The tribal elders gathered around, immediately recognizing the location Thomas had marked, a distinctive formation where 3 canyons converged around a natural spring. "Water from Earth Heart," Nyanesgani explained. "Sacred. Healing." She beckoned Sarah to follow her to a small cave at the edge of the camp. Inside, illuminated by a small fire, Sarah gasped at the sight of rock walls lined with veins of silver, far more extensive than what Thomas had discovered. "We know about silver long time," the old woman said simply. "Not important to us. Water is treasure, not metal." Sarah understood then why protecting this knowledge was so vital. Thomas and others like him would destroy the sacred spring to extract the silver, heedless of its greater value to the Apache. The next morning, a small party prepared for the journey to Copper Creek. Gojo, 3 of his most trusted warriors, Sarah with Hannah, Martha, and Lieutenant Cooper with his 2 soldiers. As they made final preparations, Sarah tore a strip from her petticoat and tied it to a stick, creating a makeshift white flag. "A symbol of truce," she explained to Gojo. "So they will not fire upon us immediately." The lieutenant, watching this, nodded approvingly. "A wise precaution, Mrs. Ellsworth." As they set out, following game trails that would lead them back to more familiar paths, Sarah felt a strange mix of fear and determination. She had left Copper Creek as property to be sold. She would return as a woman who had found her voice and her place in the most unexpected of circumstances. The journey took 2 days, their progress slowed by the need to find passable routes through flood-damaged terrain. They encountered no sign of the rest of the search party, though twice they spotted distant riders who might have been scouts from the town or the army fort. On the afternoon of the 2nd day, they crested a ridge that offered a clear view of Copper Creek in the valley below. The town appeared unchanged, a collection of wooden buildings clustered around a dusty main street, wisps of smoke rising from chimneys, the steeple of the small church standing slightly taller than the surrounding structures. "Are you ready?" Gojo asked quietly, coming to stand beside Sarah. She straightened her spine, adjusted Hannah's cradleboard, and raised the white flag. "Yes," she said firmly. It's time they heard the truth. The town bell rang out in alarm as the unusual procession approached Copper Creek's main street. Shopkeepers hurried to close their doors. Women gathered children from play and hustled them indoors. Men emerged with rifles and shotguns, forming an uneasy line across the street. At the front of this impromptu militia stood Sheriff Wade, his Winchester raised but not yet aimed. Beside him, Mayor Thornton fidgeted with his spectacles, looking more frightened than authoritative. "Hold your fire!" Lieutenant Cooper called out as they drew closer, moving slightly ahead of the group. "These people come in peace." A murmur of surprise rippled through the gathered townspeople at the sight of Cooper, whom many had presumed dead after the storm. "Lieutenant," Sheriff Wade lowered his rifle slightly, "we thought you were lost in the flood." "Nearly was," Cooper confirmed, gesturing to his splintered arm. "These Apache saved my life and those of my men." The sheriff's gaze shifted past Cooper to where Sarah walked beside Gojo, Hannah secured on her back in the cradleboard. The white flag fluttered in the afternoon breeze. "Mrs. Ellsworth," the mayor called out, his voice carrying a forced joviality. "Thank heavens you've been rescued from these—" "I wasn't rescued, Mayor Thornton," Sarah interrupted, her voice clear and steady. "I was never a captive." She stepped forward to stand beside Cooper, facing the town that had allowed her to be sold like property. The cradle board on her back, the beaded necklace at her throat, the Apache-style dress she wore, all marked her transformation from the timid doctor's daughter they had known. "Ring the town bell," she said to the mayor. "Gather everyone. There are truths that need speaking, and I'll only speak them once. Whether it was the authority in her voice or simple curiosity, the mayor nodded to a boy nearby who ran to pull the bell rope. Its sonorous tones echoed through the town, bringing more residents to the street. Sarah scanned the growing crowd, searching for one face in particular. "Where is my husband?" she asked. Sheriff Wade shifted uncomfortably. "Thomas Ellsworth hasn't returned since the storm. We assumed he was with the lieutenant's group." A small satisfaction flowed through Sarah at this news. Thomas was still out there somewhere, searching for silver he would never find. As the crowd grew, Gojo and his warriors remained vigilant but peaceful, standing with dignity despite the open hostility directed their way. Martha Bell had moved to stand with her fellow townspeople, but her eyes remained supportive as she watched Sarah. "3 weeks ago," Sarah began when the crowd had assembled, her voice carrying in the tense silence, "I was sold at auction to settle debts incurred by Thomas Ellsworth. Not a single person in this town stepped forward to prevent this. Not you, Mayor Thornton, nor you, Sheriff Wade." She let her gaze sweep across familiar faces, noting the shame in some eyes, the defiance in others. "The only person who acted with honor that day was this man," she continued, gesturing to Gojo. "He spent his silver to purchase our freedom, mine, and my daughter's, then led us to safety when the town that should have protected us failed to do so." "That's one version of events," Banker Holloway called out from the crowd. "But the law? The law?" Sarah's laugh held no humor. "Let's speak of law, Mr. Holloway. Is it legal to sell human beings in the Colorado Territory, or did you manipulate frontier statutes to serve your own interests?" Holloway's face flushed. "The papers were in order. Thomas pledged you against his debts. Without my knowledge or consent," Sarah finished. "And speaking of my husband, did any of you know his true purpose in searching for me? It wasn't concern for my welfare. It was this." She pulled the folded map from her pocket, holding it up for all to see. "Thomas discovered silver on Apache land. He drew this map, then sold false deeds to gamblers in Silver Springs. When they discovered his deception, he fled back here, and when they came looking for him, he offered me and his unborn child as payment instead." A shocked murmur ran through the crowd. Lieutenant Cooper stepped forward. "I can confirm this," he said. "Ellsworth admitted as much to our search party. He was desperate to recover this map, which he believed Mrs. Ellsworth had unknowingly taken with her." "That's a damned lie!" The shout came from the edge of the crowd, which parted to reveal Thomas Ellsworth, filthy and wild-eyed, his clothing torn from days in the wilderness. He staggered forward, pointing accusingly at Sarah. "My wife was stolen by savages. I've been searching for her, risking my life." "Enough, Thomas," Sarah said, her voice cutting through his protestations. "Your lies end today." Thomas lurched toward her, his face contorted with rage. "Give me that map, you ungrateful—" Gojo moved with lightning speed, stepping between Sarah and Thomas. The two men stood face to face, one driven by greed, the other by honor. The town bell began to ring again, but this time it was not a call to gather. It was a cry of alarm, for Hannah had chosen this moment to begin wailing, a piercing sound that cut through the tension like a knife, reminding everyone present that at the heart of this confrontation was not silver or pride, but the future of a child born into a world divided by prejudice and greed. Hannah's cries grew more distressed, transforming from simple discomfort to something more alarming. Sarah turned away from the confrontation, quickly removing the cradle board to examine her daughter. "She's burning up," Sarah announced, panic edging her voice. Hannah's face was flushed bright red, her tiny body rigid with fever. The standoff between Thomas and Gojo forgotten, Sarah cradled her daughter against her chest. "She needs help, now!" Dr. Simmons, Copper Creek's elderly physician, pushed through the crowd. "Bring her to my office," he offered, professional concern overriding any prejudice against Sarah's unusual companions. Sarah hesitated, looking to Gojo and Nayenesgani, who had remained silent during the confrontation. I need both kinds of medicine, she said firmly, Western and Apache. A murmur of disapproval rippled through some townspeople, but Martha Bell stepped forward. My home is closer than the doctor's office. We can go there. With surprising swiftness, the crowd's focus shifted from the confrontation to the crisis of a sick infant. Sheriff Wade shouldered Thomas aside, directing his deputies to maintain order. Lieutenant Cooper organized a small escort to Martha's home, ensuring both Sarah's party and the townspeople maintained a respectful distance from each other. Inside Martha's modest home, Hannah was laid upon the kitchen table, her tiny body shaking. With fever, Dr. Simmons opened his medical bag, extracting a thermometer and stethoscope. "How long has she been ill?" he asked, professional demeanor firmly in place. "She was fine this morning," Sarah replied, hovering anxiously. "No symptoms during our journey." Nyanesgani approached the table, her ancient eyes assessing the child with wisdom born of generations. She spoke softly in Apache to Gojo, who translated. "Grandmother says same sickness that took you before. In the blood now, very dangerous." Dr. Simmons looked up from his examination, skepticism clear on his face. "The child has a severe infection, likely pneumonia developing. I'll prepare a quinine solution and mustard plaster." "With respect, doctor," Sarah interjected, "I've seen Nyanesgani treat this before. When I was ill, her medicine saved me when I thought I would die." "Mrs. Ellsworth," the doctor began patronizingly, "surely you don't believe in primitive—" "I believe in what works," Sarah interrupted firmly, "and I believe we need both approaches now." She turned to Nyanesgani. "What do you need for your medicine?" The old woman spoke rapidly to Gojo, who listed off several plants and materials. To everyone's surprise, Dr. Simmons recognized some of them. "Willow bark, elderberry, those unknown febrifuges," he admitted reluctantly. "I use them myself when commercial medicines are unavailable." "Perhaps," Martha suggested carefully, "there is wisdom in both traditions." Outside, a tense crowd had gathered. News of the baby's illness spread rapidly through town, superseding even the shocking revelations about Thomas Ellsworth. Mothers who had watched their own children battle frontier illnesses felt particular sympathy, regardless of their views. On Sarah's unusual situation, inside, an extraordinary collaboration was unfolding. Dr. Simmons administered what medicines he had available, while Nyanesgani prepared poultices and teas using herbs gathered by Martha and other townswomen from nearby gardens and woods. Gojo maintained a quiet vigil near the door, both protector and bridge between two worlds. As evening approached, Hannah's condition worsened. Her breathing became labored, her tiny chest heaving with each effort. Sarah, exhausted from the journey and emotional confrontation, refused to leave her daughter's side. "She needs more help than we can provide," Dr. Simmons finally admitted, wiping his brow. "The infection is moving too quickly." A commotion at the front door drew their attention. Thomas Ellsworth pushed his way in, his earlier rage replaced by something unfamiliar, genuine concern, perhaps even remorse. "I brought these," he said, holding out a packet of expensive medicines, "from my saddlebag. I always carried them, in case." He wouldn't meet Sarah's eyes. "They're from that Boston apothecary your father favored." Sarah stared at the familiar packaging. Medicines she had used countless times in her father's practice, rare and costly in this frontier town. Without a word, she took the packet and handed it to Dr. Simmons. As the doctor prepared this unexpected treatment, Nyanesgani began a soft rhythmic chant. Rather than object, Dr. Simmons worked around her, tacitly acknowledging that in this moment of crisis, pride and prejudice had no place. Through the night, this unlikely assembly maintained their vigil. Townspeople brought food and fresh water. The Apache warriors stood guard outside, ensuring their elder was safe among those who had been enemies. Martha organized the townswomen to boil water and prepare fresh linens. By midnight, Hannah's fever reached its crisis point. Sarah, beyond exhaustion, held her daughter's tiny hand, while Dr. Simmons and Nyenesgani worked in unexpected harmony, one monitoring pulse and respiration, the other applying herbal compresses and singing healing songs. If she survives until dawn, Dr. Simmons whispered to Martha, she may have a chance. Outside, the townspeople and Apache alike kept watch under the same stars, united in the most fundamental of human hopes, the survival of a child who belonged to both their worlds. A week after Hannah's fever broke, Copper Creek hummed with unprecedented activity. The town hall, rarely used except for holiday gatherings, had been prepared for a historic meeting. Inside, two distinct groups faced each other across a broad table, town officials on one side, Apache representatives on the other. Mayor Thornton, visibly nervous, shuffled papers before him. Sheriff Wade sat stone-faced beside him, while Harrison Holloway, the banker, repeatedly checked his pocket watch. Lieutenant Cooper stood near the wall, his arm still in its splint, but healing well. On the opposite side, Gojo sat with quiet dignity, flanked by two tribal elders. His expression revealed nothing, but his eyes missed no detail of the proceedings. Between these two groups, serving as interpreter and mediator, sat Sarah. Hannah, fully recovered and alert, rested in her cradleboard beside her mother. "This meeting will come to order," Mayor Thornton announced, his voice carrying more authority than usual. "We are gathered to formalize a peace agreement between Copper Creek and the band of Apache led by Gojo, nephew of Chief Naiche." Sarah translated the mayor's words into Apache, then relayed Gojo's formal response. The pattern continued as the terms were discussed: trading rights, territorial boundaries, mutual protection against raiders of either race. With each exchange, the initial tension in the room gradually eased. "We propose monthly trading days," the mayor continued, "with fair prices guaranteed by a committee of both Apache and townspeople." After Sarah's translation, Gojo responded at length. Sarah turned back to the mayor. "Gojo agrees to trading days, but requests they be held at neutral ground between town and Apache territory. He also asks that all trades be recorded in both languages to prevent future misunderstandings." The negotiations continued through the morning, each side finding unexpected common ground with their former adversaries. The most contentious point, the silver deposits, was addressed directly by Gojo. "The silver lies beneath sacred springs," Sarah translated. "The Apache will permit limited mining only if the water is protected and a portion of any profits is used to benefit both peoples." By midday, a remarkable document had been drafted, a treaty written in both English and Apache, with provisions for mutual respect and cooperation. When Mayor Thornton and Gojo signed the agreement, witnessed by Lieutenant Cooper and the tribal elders, a small piece of frontier history was made. Outside the town hall, life in Copper Creek was undergoing its own transformation. Martha Bell had converted part of the schoolhouse into a small clinic, where Sarah now practiced a unique blend of Western and Apache medicine. Women from town and tribe alike brought their children for treatment, creating unexpected bonds across cultural divides. Thomas Ellsworth was notably absent from these proceedings. After Hannah's recovery, he had signed divorce papers prepared by the town's part-time lawyer, relinquishing all claims to Sarah and their daughter. The same day, he had ridden out of Copper Creek, ostensibly bound for California. Few expected or wanted him to return. As the meeting concluded, Lieutenant Cooper approached Sarah. "I've written to my superiors about what I've witnessed here," he said. "I've recommended they recognize this treaty officially and use it as a model for other settlements." "Do you think they will?" Sarah asked skeptically. Cooper smiled ruefully. "Probably not, but I'll keep advocating for it nonetheless." Outside, preparations were underway for an unprecedented celebration. Tables had been set up along the main street, laden with food contributed by both communities. Apache musicians tuned instruments alongside the town's fiddle player. Children from both groups already played together, their natural curiosity overcoming ingrained suspicions. As twilight approached, Gojo found Sarah watching the scene from Martha's porch. Hannah slept peacefully in her arms, her fever just a memory now. "This peace," Gojo said quietly, "will it last?" Sarah considered the question. "Perhaps not forever, but it's a beginning." He nodded, then asked the question that had remained, unspoken between them since their return to town. "Will you stay here now, in town?" "I've been thinking about that," Sarah replied. "I don't fully belong in either world anymore." She turned to face him directly. "I was considering building a small cabin halfway between town and your winter camp. A place where people from both worlds could come for healing. A bridge place," Gojo said thoughtfully. "Good medicine there." "Would you visit such a place?" Sarah asked, her voice carefully neutral. Gojo's usually stoic expression softened. "Not visit, help build. Strong walls needed for winter." Below them, the first dancers had taken to the improvised dance floor. A young Apache woman, paired with one of Cooper's soldiers, moving awkwardly but earnestly to the mixed music. Others gradually joined, creating a spectacle unprecedented in the territory's history. "Your people have a word," Sarah said softly. "Hojo, it means beauty, harmony, balance." Gojo nodded. "Hard word to understand. Easier to feel." He gestured toward the celebration. "Like this moment." As they watched the unlikely celebration unfold, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced since leaving Boston years ago. A sense of possibility, of a future being written not by others' expectations, but by her own choices. 1 year later, the cabin that stood halfway between Copper Creek and the Apache winter camp had become a landmark in its own right. Built of stone and timber, with a wide porch that caught the morning sun, it was neither fully of one world nor the other, much like its owner, Sarah Ellsworth, though she now more often used her maiden name, Morgan, stood in her garden, watching Hannah toddle among the careful rows of plants. At 18 months, the little girl was sturdy and confident, equally comfortable chattering in English or Apache phrases. Her dark curls bounced as she squatted to examine a ladybug with intense concentration. "Nju," she announced solemnly, using the Apache word for bug that grandmother Nyenesgani had taught her. "Yes, that's right," Sarah agreed, smiling at her daughter's growing vocabulary. The garden itself told the story of Sarah's transformed life. Neat rows of familiar vegetables, carrots, beans, potatoes, grew alongside unfamiliar plants with medicinal properties that she had learned from the Apache. European herbs from seeds Martha had ordered from back east flourished next to native wildflowers, whose healing properties had been known to the Apache for generations. The sound of approaching horses drew Sarah's attention. She shaded her eyes. Against the afternoon sun, watching as a small group of riders approached from the direction of Copper Creek. She recognized Martha Bell's pinto mare among them, alongside Lieutenant, now Captain, Cooper's bay gelding. They had come for the celebration, Sarah realized. 1 year since the treaty signing, 1 year of tentative but real peace in this small corner of the frontier. From the opposite direction, the distinctive silhouette of Gojo appeared on the ridge, leading a group of his people down the well-worn path from their camp. Hannah spotted him immediately and began an excited dance, calling out "Joe," her special name for the man who had become so central to their lives. Sarah scooped up her daughter and moved to greet both groups as they converged at her home. The visitors dismounted, exchanging cautious but increasingly comfortable greetings. Across cultural lines, Martha embraced Sarah warmly, while Captain Cooper offered a respectful nod to Gojo. "Your school children are ready," Martha told Sarah, excitement evident in her voice. "They've been practicing for weeks." Sarah nodded, pleased. Martha's school now taught both settler and Apache children, using a curriculum that honored both cultures. Today's celebration would feature songs and recitations in both languages, a small miracle in a territory still fraught with conflict. As more visitors arrived, townspeople, Apache families, even a few travelers who had heard of this unusual frontier experiment, Sarah felt a moment of quiet pride. What had begun in the horror of an auction block had transformed into something unexpected and precious. Gojo approached, Hannah immediately reaching for him from Sarah's arms. He took the child with practiced ease, settling her on his shoulders, where she giggled with delight. "Many people come," he observed. "More than last moon's trading day." "Word is spreading," Sarah agreed. "Captain Cooper says even the territorial governor has expressed interest in our treaty." They moved together toward the large clearing where tables had been set up for the feast. The sense of both traditional Apache cooking and frontier American fare mingled in the air. Venison stew alongside baked ham, pignon cakes beside apple pies. In the center of the clearing stood a young cottonwood tree, planted exactly 1 year ago as a living symbol of the treaty. Already it had grown several feet, its roots taking firm hold in the soil that belonged to no one and everyone. As the celebration began, with Martha's school children singing in 2 languages and elders from both communities sharing stories, Sarah found herself standing beside Gojo near the young tree. Hannah had run off to play with children from both worlds, fearless in her belonging to this unique community. "1 year ago," Gojo said quietly, "you stand at auction block. I place silver in man's hand." He gestured to the gathering. "Could not see this future then?" "No," Sarah agreed. "Sometimes the worst moments lead to unexpected paths." She looked down at her hand, where a band of silver set with turquoise now encircled her finger, a token of their union 3 months earlier, in a ceremony that had honored both their traditions while creating something entirely new. As the sun began to set over the distant canyon walls, casting long shadows across the land that had witnessed so much change, Sarah thought of the leather pouch of silver that had altered her fate that day in Copper Creek. What had begun as a transaction had become transformation. Not just for her and Hannah, but for 2 communities that had found a fragile but genuine peace. The circle that began with purchase had completed itself with something beyond price, understanding, respect, and the promise of a future where differences might be bridged by the simple recognition of shared humanity.